What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, and today it's my number 23 team in my 2023 NFL Power Ranking Series. It's the Cleveland Browns. Make sure to hit the like and the subscribe. This is truly probably the most glaring team that has suffered from the strength of schedule, specifically the strength of their division. I think if you put this team in the AFC South, in the NFC South, in the NFC North even, this would be a much higher ranked team. They got a lot of talent in a lot of key places. There is one glaring weakness on this team, which is why they ended up ranking here and why I ended up selecting certain games for them to lose. And we'll get to that, obviously, once we get over. Spoiler alert, it's on the defensive side of the football. They have a pretty good coaching staff. I would classify them as, maybe I have them ranked a little bit lower than people would like, but I do think that they have a coaching staff that's in this almost like a tiered area where between coaching staffs 12 to like 20, there's not a whole lot of difference. It's very, very subtle, very small differences that separate these coaching staffs, and I think that it's one of those things where I wouldn't really argue if you had them ranked much higher, but we'll get to that as well. They also have the one of the worst human beings on the history of the NFL, at least for an active player, on their roster playing the quarterback position. We'll get to that, and we will only discuss his talent on the football field and my faith in said talent on the football field. As of this recording, DeAndre Hopkins has not signed. So I know Cleveland sort of started to enter the conversation there a bit because of the connection with the quarterback. It has not happened as of this recording, so it's not going to be reflected. If you want to see what kind of impact DeAndre Hopkins, I keep saying DeAndre Hopkins would have on a offense and on a team, you can check out my New England Patriots video, which has already been done. Because that seems to be the team that's the front runner as of this recording. So I did reflect what impact he would have on an offense and their rankings in that video. Cleveland does have a great, if not the greatest in the league right now, edge rushers in Myles Garrett, who makes a humongous difference in the passing game. They have a lot of depth in their secondary. I think they've done a really good job of putting together a really effective defensive side of the football, and with their defensive coordinator, who's a really good defensive mind. There's a lot of potential there, but there is a hole that could affect them in a lot of these close games, especially if they fall behind. They've sort of lost a lot of depth on the offense, some key depth pieces on the offense, but they drafted really well. They drafted a lot of guys that I'm very high on. And we'll get to those specifically on the offensive line. So there's a lot of potential here that I think they did a pretty decent job in the draft, at least, of trying to keep up with the rest of their division. I still think that they're definitely not the second best team in the division, and they're certainly not the best team in the division. I think they're competing for that third and fourth spot in the division. I think that it pretty much has set them up where they're staring at 4 division losses this year, just because they're just not on that level. And anytime you're losing a majority of your divisional games, it's not a good projection for the rest of the season. I think that there's some really tough games that they have as well, and some matchup issues in particular, where certain teams who will be able to exploit some of the weaknesses that Cleveland still has. With that said, if they get some guys who can develop during training camp, they find some diamonds in the rough in certain positions, they could sort of supplant, in my opinion, the Pittsburgh Steelers as being the third best team in this division. I'm not so sure that it would supplant a team like Baltimore, but I still think that there is a lot of room for growth here, and kind of like what we talked about in the previous video with the Atlanta Falcons, a couple things go right here that I'm not projecting and foreseeing and seeing as the most likely scenario. It could drastically change where this team ends up rankings wise. and overall in terms of the rest of the league. But we'll start, as we always do, with the coaching staff, so let's get to that. So this is my 18th ranked coaching staff, but like I said at the top, I think they could fall anywhere between really inside the top 20 to the top 10. I wouldn't be opposed to you ranking them in the top 15 at all. You wouldn't get an argument from me, really. It's so close. You get some of these coaching staffs, man, it's so close. So many of them, there's so many good coaching staffs on paper, at least. That's, a lot of good coaches are finding themselves ranked kind of low. Stefanski's one of the better offensive minds. He's being paired up with Alex Van Pelt, who, for those of you that are my age, you remember when Alex Van Pelt was actually a quarterback in the NFL for teams like the Buffalo Bills. And I think Stefanski in general, he has a very reliable offensive system. I think that we're going to see the effects of not having Kareem Hunt anymore as a spell for Nick Chubb. With that said, Chubb's going to get a lot more touches here. I mean, Ford and Felton and stuff are going to be incorporated, and they're going to sort of share what was probably some of Kareem Hunt's touches, but Chubb is also going to take up those as well. So it'll be interesting to see how Stefanski and Van Pelt use that. This is the first full season they're going to have Deshaun Watson. So we saw what he was able to do with Baker Mayfield, but Baker also fell off significantly. So can he elevate Deshaun Watson back to what he was in his last year in Houston? There was a lot of struggles. When you take a year and a half off or however long Watson was off for, there does take some time to come back into that. So can Stefanski and Van Pelt work with him and get him back to where he needs to be? And where he needs to be is at the value in which they traded for him, which was they traded the entire barn for him, completely screwed up the quarterback contract market, etc. The defensive coordinator, Jim Schwartz, is widely respected as being one of the better defensive coordinators in the league. And he's got some really good pieces to work with on the defense side of the ball, specifically Myles Garrett. He's also got Denzel Ward, two really good cornerstone pieces of a defense. They've acquired him a lot of talent in the offseason. Specifically, one thing that this team really suffered with was having somebody opposite of Myles Garrett that can provide consistent pass rush ability. Jadeveon Clowney wasn't really that guy. He had moments of that, but Clowney's game was really being truly super effective on early downs. So they basically replaced Jadeveon Clowney with Zadarius Smith and then signed Okoronkwo from Houston to sort of be the pass rusher aspect. So there's going to be a lot of mixing and matching there, and I think Jim Schwartz is really going to be able to excel at least in that area. Where he's really going to have his issues, and we'll see that when we get to the player grades, is in the run defense. He's going to have to really be effective at, and this is on the offense as well, they're going to have to get leads early in games. Because if they fall behind, it's going to be a real struggle, especially from a defensive perspective, of getting the right guys on the field, because they don't really have the talent on the interior specifically to be effective against the run. They don't even really have it in terms of the defensive ends in general. Myles Garrett, for as amazing as he is, they're going to have to he's still somebody who against the run is not one of the best run defenders. He doesn't grade out well, and we'll see that. I think he graded out as PFF graded him like a 65 or something against the run, as opposed to the high 90s. I think he might have been the highest graded player as a pass rusher. So there is a significant difference there. Now, how much of that is not having a lack of complement and feeling like he has to do too much? I think there is a lot of that in there as well, but I'm not sure that they added the pieces in there to sort of change that attitude. Now, can Jim Schwartz create a more disciplined rush defense? We'll see. We'll see how the season goes on and the season plays out. I think they have a lot of depth pieces. They can play with a lot of things on the back end specifically, and they can even play with some things on the interior as well. I think that, they drafted Siaki Ika to help with that, which on the eyeball test, you would assume that Siaki Ika is a better run defender than a pass rusher. He didn't grade out like that, which was surprising. So he's going to have to somehow, the giant nose tackle will have to be coached up to improve. They have Dalvin Tomlinson, who they brought in as well from Minnesota, to help out with that. But did they add enough there? And I think that the real task for Jim Schwartz is going to be putting together the right personnel and the right scheme late in games when they might be behind, or in close games where they need to get some stops. They need to stop the run. How are they going to get that defensive line to work against the run in a way where the running back isn't getting first contact once he gets to Anthony Walker and Sione Takitaki and the linebackers 3 to 4 yards past the line of scrimmage? That's not conducive of being able to win games and being able to create opportunities for the offense to come back. So the offense is going to have to probably get out to some leads early on. And I think that this is a team where if they do fall behind, it could be a real problem for them, because they may not be built specifically on the defensive side of the ball to be able to come back late in games, especially if you get down 2 scores. I think it could be a disaster for this team. Probably it's the main reason why I have them ranked so low. So in the name of just talking about football, Deshaun Watson's the quarterback. I give him an 80. To me, he didn't quite look like the quarterback that you saw in Houston, which also I understand why that was the case. There's a lot of mental aspect that he was probably distracted by. And there's probably the time off, knocking the rust off, etc. New system, new teammates, new coaches, terminology, all that. He had to learn all that sort of on the fly and then come in and put it in practice for only about however many games he played last year. But this is the year that, he gets a full offseason. He's got some experience with all these teammates now. Hopefully some chemistry has been built. And we'll see what he can get to. We'll see how well he can play. I'm not so sure that he is going to end up being worth what they traded for him. I certainly think he's an upgrade of what they had, but I don't think that he's ever going to get back to where he was looking like he was a top 5 quarterback. I just don't see it. I don't think that there's the personnel on this team in order to do that. I do like the pieces. I like some of the weapons that he has in the passing game in particular. I like the offensive line. It's just going to be, I don't know that he's the same guy. When these things happen, whether guilty, innocent, whatever, it does take a toll on a person mentally, and it takes a really, really special human to be able to overcome that. And that me saying that I'm not sure that he has overcome that is not me even putting him down. It's me saying that he doesn't fall within like that 1% of people, and there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think there's a lot of us that don't. A lot of us wouldn't. Most of us wouldn't, if not all people watching and listening right now wouldn't. His arm talent is undeniable, but is it regressing? They drafted a quarterback to sort of be molded behind him in Dorian Thompson-Robinson, but they don't really have a good backup that I would specifically rely on. A couple of years ago, I would have said Kellen Mond was a fantastic backup, but boy, in Minnesota was that absolutely no love was given to him there, to the point where people were shocked and they couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe that he wasn't even getting a look. They're like, yeah, we know what we got in Kellen Mond, and he's sitting on the bench. That might have ruined his career completely. But Deshaun's going to have to play, and they invested all that money in him. And, we'll see how this plays out. Deshaun is a good running threat. He's probably, in my opinion, he's the second best running threat on the team. How much they're going to be using that with him based on the money they're paying him is a completely different thing altogether. And they got Nick Chubb, who's one of the best running backs in the NFL. He grades out as a 91 for me. The real question mark is who's running back 2 with Kareem Hunt gone. Are they going to bring in someone like Dalvin Cook, Ezekiel Elliott, or any of the other running backs currently on the market? Because right now they have Jerome Ford, who as a rookie people were really high on, but when he did get on the field, didn't really show a whole lot. Then they got Demetric Felton, but Demetric Felton isn't really he's like a running back / receiver type. He's sort of like a Cordero Patterson in a way, but I think less of a vicious runner, obviously, than Cordero Patterson because he's smaller. So it's interesting how they're going to find that second running back and how much of this load is going to go on Nick Chubb, because if Nick Chubb goes down like he has in the past, it's really going to become a difficult go, I think, for this running attack, even when you look at the receiving backs, because Chubb is the best receiving back on the team. Then it's followed by Demetric Felton, who gets a 65. But they don't have anything really outside of that. You know, Felton's going to come in on those passing downs to give Chubb a break. Jerome Ford's probably going to be the one to come in on early downs to give Chubb a break. But how often is that going to occur? I don't know if it's going to occur all that much, and there's going to be a humongous load on Nick Chubb to help carry that aspect of the offense. And putting that on any running back is a dangerous proposition. It really is, because then you end up like the Tennessee Titans, where if Derrick Henry's not playing well, or if they figure out a way to stop Derrick Henry, that whole offense is dead. I think we saw a lot of that with my team, the New York Giants, and Saquon Barkley. When Barkley wasn't performing, that offense wasn't performing. So it's going to be interesting to see Chubb in that position where he's the sole proprietor of what's going to really make those early downs in particular execute well, and how many third and shorts are they going to be living in is really going to be up to him in the play of his effectiveness and the effectiveness of the offensive line. So now we're going over to the receiver group, and they do have a true, in my opinion, number one wide receiver, Amari Cooper, one of the best route runners in the NFL. He's going to be somebody who's going to create separation and get open. I think him and Watson together, they're going to create a 90-plus catch season, 1,200 yards, and 8 or 9 touchdowns probably. Then you got Donovan Peoples-Jones, who's sort of settling in as that number 2 receiver. They traded for Elijah Moore, who I loved coming out of college, who didn't really work out with the Jets, had a bit of an attitude problem, so now maybe the change of scenery will help him out, playing in the slot. We'll see how that works out. Then they got David Njoku, who, okay. He does great quite high. He's really effective when he gets the ball. But how often is he going to be included in the offense? The thing is, he's still not like a Travis Kelce or a George Kittle or a Mark Andrews or a Darren Waller, where his production every week can sort of be guaranteed, the way that you would see with somebody like a Devontae Adams, for example, like a receiver type like that, like a Devontae Adams or a Cooper Kupp or Tyreek Hill or whatever, where you're like, how many touches they're going to get, you can know how many yards they're going to get, what they're going to give you week to week. David Njoku, even after getting paid, disappears for weeks at a time. And that's usually why teams, and I think the community was shocked when he got paid the way that he did, because of how often he disappears, because he's not that top flight tight end. Top flight tight ends and top flight running backs are sort of in the same world when it comes to production and how they get paid. That second tier of tight end, that second tier of running back, they're not the ones getting paid really anymore, because of, frankly, how replaceable they are. David Njoku, again, will go weeks at a time without performing, and his backup might be the one that has a good day, the number 2 tight end, or it'll be a day for the running backs, for the backup running backs, the receiving backs, or it'll be a day for that number 4 wide receiver. And you don't want that necessarily to be somebody that you're paying highly. And I think that as time goes on, and I think he's in the second year of that contract, and I think it was a 4-year deal. It was a 4-year deal, so maybe after this year, they might be looking to maybe restructure it a little bit, or even get out of it, depending on what they get out of him this year. Just because, can you replace his production over the stretch of 17 games? And I think that you can. with a number of different players and different pieces. And you look at the depth here of the receivers, they did draft Cedric Tillman, who I liked out of Tennessee. I think he's probably skill level the second best receiver on the team. The likelihood of him starting early in the year, I think, is pretty low because Donovan Peoples-Jones is there and he has some experience in this offense already. Elijah Moore got brought in to play the slot player, and Tillman's going to be an outside receiver. So I think he's going to be competing with Donovan Peoples-Jones a lot throughout training camp and throughout the season. Marquise Goodwin is still just that burner straight down the field, sprint it out, stretch the defense. I think he could be very effective. He was sort of brought in to be what Anthony Schwartz was supposed to be, who he just hasn't been. In terms of, you want to get that guy out there straight line speed, and then it opens up opportunities for great route runners. So I think Goodwin could find himself on the field quite often this year, just to open up some opportunities for guys like Elijah Moore and Amari Cooper in those short to intermediate areas as they pull the safeties deep down the field with the speed that they have. Jalen Darden, I think, can apply to that as well. David Bell was drafted last year, I believe it was, and I don't know. I think he was overdrafted completely. Jakeem Grant's their special teams contributor. A gadget guy. They might drop one play for him a week, but most of his contributions are going to be as a return man. Jordan Akins is actually a really good backup tight end for this offense, and this is what I mean when we talk about David Njoku disappearing for weeks at a time. In the receiving game, Jordan Akins is quite good, so he'll get a lot of opportunities as well. So you could end up replacing the sort of like tight end by committee opportunities that you get a lot. You can sort of mix and match people for matchup things, because David Njoku, above everything else, is a matchup issue. Harrison Bryant hasn't really worked out all that much, but I mean, they do have some really strong depth here at the receiver position. And I think Cedric Tillman and Donovan Peoples-Jones are going to have a real opportunity to compete with one another to establish a true number 2 receiver in this offense. I think Jordan Akins is going to be able to be there to pick up the slack when Njoku does have those those couple week long stretches where he's disappearing. So I think that they've got some pieces in here in the receiving aspect of the game that they don't necessarily have at the running back position to sort of at least make up for some deficiencies in the passing game. Now we're going to talk about the offensive line, and this offensive line is the definition of solid. Above average to good, maybe great, depending on what kind of production you get. To me, it's really going to live and die on Jedrick Wills. They picked up his 5th-year option. I think that it's a mistake that some people are sort of giving up on him, because he is the victim of being in a very strong tackle class. Mekhi Becton came out in his rookie year, played really, really well. Same thing with Tristan Wirfs. Andrew Thomas, following the rookie season, established himself as one of the top 3 or 4 left tackles in the league. In any other draft class, I think Jedrick Wills is looked at as one of the better tackles of the class, but he's a victim of being 3rd or 4th, depending on what your view is on Mekhi Becton, in his draft class. And I think that that's increased expectations of him that may not have existed otherwise. So this is a real test year for him, and I think that if he can play up to the level, if he can take a step forward here, take a giant step forward, then this becomes maybe the best pass blocking offensive line in the NFL. Because they do have really solid guard play with Bitonio and Wyatt Teller. Wyatt Teller is like the definition of a balanced guard. You're getting top level, you're getting like top 10 pass blocking and top 10 run blocking from him. Where I think you get a lot of players, especially on the offensive line, where they're really good at one particular thing, and then in the other aspect of the game, they're kind of like average. There's a huge stretch in it. Like DJ Humphries is a good example of that. I think that even somebody, I think the guy there at right tackle, Jack Conklin, is a good example of that as well. I think he's a good pass blocker. Grades out of 79, but we'll see his run blocking, not so great. I do think that they did sign Jack Conklin with the expectation that he was going to be the long-term guy. I think he signed a 3-year deal. But when we look at the depth, especially with a guy like Ethan Pocic as well, they signed these two guys almost like insurance policies. And then in the draft, they had two great Ohio State talents who just fell into their lap. And we'll talk about the depth there right away. Luke Weipler, the interior offensive lineman, the backup, who's going to be the backup center, and then DeJuan Jones, who's going to be the backup right tackle this season. These are guys who potentially next year could be starters. They have the talent level. I think that they were absolute steals when they were picked up. Cleveland did a great job here, and it really allows them now some flexibility in some of these bigger offensive line contracts, like Jack Conklin, for example, Ethan Pocic, who they both signed to pretty decent deals. And if they pick up an injury now, they have a nice young guy that they can put in there who can play well, I think, right out the gate in both aspects of the game. DeJuan Jones, I think DeJuan Jones might overall already be pretty close to what you're getting out of Jack Conklin. I think Luke Weipler is pretty close to what you're going to get out of Ethan Pocic. So I think that there's the depth there is so important. It's so key to have on the offensive line. Even a guy like Drew Forbes, you can throw in there at guard, who's going to give you some quality pass blocking at least. They got so many good players here. And then, James Hudson doesn't grade out well in pass blocking. Does not the case in run blocking, though. So there's just a lot of potential here on this offensive line. They've done a great job of adding the right pieces to this offensive line to not only get quality starters, but to have quality depth as well. So now we move on to the run blocking. You can see the tackles there. They do take a little bit of a step back. Conklin takes a significant step back. Jedrick Wills, he's just a little bit better as a pass blocker so far. I think he can, if he takes a step forward, he can take a step forward in both aspects of his game and hopefully maintain some of that balance. Bitonio and Teller, like I said, they're perfect example of really balanced guards. You know what you're going to get out of them. They're, perfect to put in there in any situation. Pocic is a much better run blocker than a pass blocker. This is where he really established himself as a starter over Luke Weipler. Because we go into the depth now, you see they got some really good depth even here. Forbes, not a great run blocker, but James Hudson takes a huge step up as a run blocker. Weipler, sort of the same. I think he's much like the Bitonios and Wyatt Tellers on this team, where you know what you're going to get in both aspects. I know there's injury concerns that caused him to drop in the draft, but because now he's coming in as a backup, he's going to kind of have like a year, as it looks like, maybe even 2 years to get right with his health. And then DeJuan Jones, fantastic run blocker, just a big giant body that you probably feel safe putting out there. I wouldn't be surprised if we see on early downs, maybe DeJuan Jones in there as a sixth offensive lineman on those running downs, just to give an extra oomph in the run game. I think James Hudson can play that role as well. I think that there's a lot of opportunities that are going to make things a lot easier and better for their running game, because they lack the depth at the running back position, but they can make up for it by putting these big sixth offensive linemen on the field and get quality run blocking out of them. It's going to help them finish games where they do have leads. So running through the position summaries here, and as you can see, they do lack some depth. They can cut some guys that'll probably bring the grades up a bit on some of these depth pieces. But, the tight end blocking, the wide receiver blocking is not very good. So a lot of their run is going to have to come between the tackles. And you can load up a box. You have some quality interior defensive players like some of the guys and teams in this division have. It's going to make it difficult for the offense. In terms of passing, they can get the receivers open and stuff. They're going to have a fight for that number 2. But there is a problem with depth on the bottom end. They do have 5 wide receivers that I like, which should be enough. You hope is enough to produce, but Goodwin maybe, his age starts to show a bit. Jakeem Grant doesn't really perform in the receiving game, so it would or in the return game. then that would make his position on the roster kind of worthless. So is there somebody like Anthony Schwartz or David Bell who's going to step up? Is Cedric Tillman going to perform to what I haven't projected as, or is he going to be closer to what David Bell was? It's all that stuff is sort of up in the air. So it'll be interesting to see how they operate. I think their offensive line is being as strong as it is, though, is going to create a higher floor for this offense than it would for others. So we do take a look at the offense summer here, and they do have the 14th ranked offense for me in the entire league. 11th passing offense, 18th against the run, and a lot of that is because the wide receiver and the tight end blocking is not as strong. The offensive line is not as strong against the run as they are against the pass, and I think that especially when you have some weaker tight end play in terms of blocking, run blocking, and then your tackles aren't as strong as run blockers. They're on the weaker end. That does create issues for those straight line runs. You're going to have to really get strong play out of the interior offensive line, which they do. But how are you going to be able to prevent those edges from being sealed by disciplined defensive ends? I think that could be a bit of a problem for them throughout the season. So now we're moving on to the defensive side of the ball, and we'll start with the pass rush, which is the ultimate strength of this team. Myles Garrett gets a 94. Top level, if not the best defensive end in the league. Then you get Zadarius Smith, who I have right now on passing downs as being an interior rusher. You saw this a lot in Green Bay, and even his time in Minnesota. He's somebody who on those third downs, you'll see him line up over the center. You'll see him line up as a 3 technique, as a 1 technique, there's so many ways that they use him that he can be effective because he has the strength to be able to play as an interior rusher. But he also has the discipline to kick him outside. Dalvin Tomlinson came over from Minnesota as well. He's sort of their do-it-all interior defensive lineman, their 3-down defensive lineman. Though he's not a high-level 3-down defensive lineman, he is the best that they have. Which we can discuss whether or not that's good or not. But he did take a bit of a step back from his time in New York. Not a significant step back. I just think that he didn't really play up to the contract that he was given when he left New York. Okonkwo, or Okonkwo, or whatever his name is, Okonkwo, had a great year as an edge rusher in Houston. Signs here in Cleveland to be the number 2. I think this is where you're going to see a lot of his play, though, is in these passing situations. It's really where his strength is. Just pin his ears back, go after the quarterback. In terms of their depth on the edge, they did draft Isaiah McGuire, who I actually really like as an edge guy. I think that he can get some snaps in there as well throughout the year. Not really a whole lot after him, though. Isaiah Thomas, Alex Wright, I think that we could see Zadarius Smith kick to the edge and then look at some of this interior depth. And this is where Siaki Ika can get on the field. And this is, again, on site. You would think Siaki Ika was drafted to help with the run. I think that is why he was drafted. But he doesn't need to. He's grading out early on in his career coming into the league, grading out better as a pass rusher than a run defender. Why that is, whether it's technique, whether it's, him trying to overcompensate for his perceived lack of athleticism and leaving running lanes open because of it, committing too much to a pass rush to overcompensate for perhaps his lack of speed and pass rush moves, I think could be a thing. But it does help him in the pass as a pass rusher from the interior. So I think he can get some play in there as well, especially on maybe like those second and long situations. We could see him come in there where there's still a threat against the run. And I think that they can make him a more disciplined player to drive up his contributions in run defense. But this is what I was talking about when I was referring to a huge weakness in their game, which is defending the run. You can say whatever you want about Myles Garrett. He does not grade out well as a run defender. Now, maybe putting Dalvin Tomlinson and Siaki Ika next to him, which are probably the 2 best interior defensive linemen he's played alongside of in his career, that could be a thing. Zadarius Smith, with his size and his strength ability, I think on early downs as a defensive end could be quite effective. He's probably the best of the group in terms of having that ability. But there you see Siaki Ika, he did not grade out higher as a run defender. Dalvin Tomlinson did not grade out higher as a run defender, and they're both considered to be bigger nose tackle types. I think Dalvin Tomlinson is better suited as like that 3 technique, which is what he'll play on these early downs with Siaki Ika now on the team playing that nose tackle role. But even when you get to the depth, Isaiah McGuire, he's not as good. You could probably get some snaps in there. Okoronkwo is, he's not at all a run defender. So it's the depth here. This is, again, like what I was talking about. Even with you look at the interior depth, they don't have anything. None of these guys are particularly grading out well as run defenders. So you've created now an environment where this front 4 is going to struggle against the run, which means now if you fall behind in games, like I said earlier, it's going to be very difficult to get you back in these games because teams are going to theoretically, based upon how it's looking, be able to run all over you for most of the season. So you're going to have to get leads and you're going to have to then maintain them with a strong pass defense, which luckily they have, which means they need to drastically improve and develop these guys as run defenders in order to keep up and truly, in my opinion, find themselves as being that top 15 team in the NFL. Now, their linebackers against the pass, again, pretty good. They got Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, and they got Anthony Walker. 2 very solid linebackers to have in there. Walker is a true Mike linebacker, can play against the pass, can play against the run. JOK is, he's an undersized linebacker, of course, who is better suited in the pass game. Can play against the run, though. I think he can continue to develop in that aspect as well. And you look at their depth at linebacker, they got one of the better linebacker rooms in terms of depth in the league. When you look at a guy like Matthew Adams and Sione Takitaki, who got really transferable skills. Their Takitaki to me is like a poor man's version of Anthony Walker almost in terms of his skill set. They drafted Mohamed Diabate, who against the pass, not really effective. Jacob Phillips, I think, will be struggling to make the team. I think his ability on special teams is going to have to really shine through in order for him to make it. Because you look at them against the run, you get a little bit of a boost from Anthony Walker, but kind of the same. JOK does take a step back. That is because of his size. So if he can start to play a little bit bigger than what he is, I think that could be really effective as well. But the depth, you have Sione Takitaki, who's maybe a little bit bigger, doesn't have the athleticism of a JOK, so they're almost identical in terms of their overall ability. Matthew Adams does take a step back. Diabate is better as a run defender than a pass coverage guy. I think you can mix him in throughout the season and sort of see what you got there as well. But Jacob Phillips does not get any better against the run, so he's going to have to drastically improve that aspect of his game in order to make the team, because Diabate and Matthew Adams playing on special teams could easily be the solution, and Jacob Phillips seeing his way to being cut. Now here's another group that it's really good. The pass coverage. Denzel Ward, Greg Newsome, Martin Emerson, really good corners. They got a good top 3 cornerback group with a good skill set. They signed Rodney McLeod and Juan Thornhill to improve the back end of this defense after John Johnson left. I believe. I think John Johnson might still be a free agent actually, as of this recording. I can check this out. Or did John Johnson sign with somebody? Did John Johnson sign with somebody? I wonder. No, he's still a free agent. But they got Juan Thornhill. They got Rodney McLeod. Who can sort of play, interchangeably, I believe. And then you look at some of their depth. Grant Delpit hasn't really consistently stepped up as being what he was projected as being going into his final year in college. They drafted Ronnie Hickman, who's got some skills there. I think he could definitely find his place on the special teams. They did draft Caleb Biggers and Cameron Mitchell, who aren't necessarily great in pass coverage so far. Mike Ford is one of those fourth, fifth corners on the team, special teams contributor. AJ Green the third is sort of sitting there. He's going to be competing with those two rookies for a roster spot for sure. And he's going to have to get it on special teams. And I'm not sure that he's great in terms of being a tackler. And I think that Biggers and Mitchell, I think, come into the league being better in that aspect than they are in pass coverage. So it does give them the advantage here. A big issue, though, that I have with the cornerback room in particular is in their ability against the run. The three guys that are going to be on the field the most, none of them are good, particularly good, or even they're kind of like average, below average at the run support aspect. The safeties are actually okay. They got some really good depth in terms of run support at the safety position. They got the four guys, and you can see it here with Delpit's probably the best run defender, so that's sort of where I think he'll get on the field quite a bit. But Ronnie Hickman is also quite good against the run, so they got like four guys who are really interchangeable. But Mike Ford's ability as a tackler is quite good. You know, this is really where his special teams ability comes into play. And this is what I'm talking about with Biggers and Mitchell. They are coming into the league slightly better as run defenders than they are in pass coverage. Not significantly better, but definitely better than AJ Green the third. So I think that's where he sort of finds his way, as probably being the guy on the outs. And then their depth sort of looking, you know, Delpit, Hickman, Mitchell, Biggers, Ford as their depth there in the secondary. But I wouldn't be surprised if I see Delpit or Hickman getting on the field a lot more than anybody else here, because there is a significant difference in their ability to pass cover in the cornerback room in particular that doesn't necessarily exist as significantly with the safety room. And you can play three safeties, you can move guys around in that aspect that I think at the corner position you're not really going to be able to do as much. So just looking at the position summary, their pass defense is tremendous. They got really strong on the edge. They got really strong cornerback play. They even got good linebacker play for the underneath, you know, across the middle, those crossing routes and stuff. So play a little bit of zone in there. Their linebackers are quite good at that. They do lack some depth in certain areas, but I don't think it's going to be that significant for them unless they just end up becoming a hospital of a team. The exact opposite for me can be said about their run defense. They don't have the depth. I don't think they have the overall talent level, at least projecting so far. And that's, you know, reflected here in their grades. They are the 17th overall defense in the league with the third best pass defense, but the 30th rush defense. This is what I mean when I say if this team gets out to leads, they could actually be very, very dangerous. If they fall behind, it could be a long season, particularly within their division with Baltimore, who runs the ball really well. Pittsburgh, who's going to be able to run the ball really well. The Bengals, very underrated as a run team with guys like Joe Mixon in that backfield. They drafted Chase Brown. It could be a long season for Cleveland if they don't execute early and often on the offensive side of the ball and in pass coverage. They're going to need to severely outperform or significantly outperform their defensive grades in terms of rush defense in order to really have a successful season. And I'm still not sure that they have the bodies. At least I'm more confident in the consistency of the run game of their opponents than I am in the drastic improvement of their run defense in Cleveland. And to me, that's reflected here in their schedule. I got them being swept by Cincinnati. They split with Pittsburgh and Baltimore. San Francisco, I think, you know, you got Christian McCaffrey, you got Kyle Shanahan's offense. Even though San Francisco does it because of their offensive line doesn't necessarily grade out highly for the run, they are really creative and they can sort of make up for those deficiencies in their play calling. I think it's Indianapolis. You got Jonathan Taylor and Anthony Richardson out there. You're asking for trouble. Baltimore with Lamar. You got Houston, who I think by this time late in the year, they would have settled in probably a little bit more. It is the Deshaun Watson revenge game, but I don't wish revenge there. But you got Damian Pierce, you got C.J. Stroud, and you got great depth at the running back position in Houston. The Jets with Breece Hall, the potential of them adding somebody else in the running game as well. They still got Michael Carter, they got Zonovan Knight, they got some good depth there. So looking at this team and sort of, Denver with Javonte Williams and likely getting somebody like Ezekiel Elliott or Dalvin Cook as a compliment as well, that's going to be a really good, effective run game. I can see the Rams at home stealing a win from them. There's going to be upsets all year round. But I do think that if Cam Akers stays healthy, that they can have a really effective run game as well. And their Rams are also a team that's built capable of getting out to a lead early on. So that's a dangerous team for them to play against. Just looking, where could they steal a win from? I think Arizona obviously is a place they could steal a win from. The Rams, I think they could steal a win there as well. So there's maybe, I think between the Colts, Cardinals, Rams, and Texans, that's where you could maybe find 4 wins there. But I also gave them a win against Jacksonville, which, who knows what that's going to look like. I had them splitting with Baltimore, which Baltimore is a matchup nightmare for this defense. So that could easily be 2 losses as well. So that those games could swing either way. But just the lack of faith that I have in general in the run defense, I think is going to be the ultimate downfall of this team, which is why I have them finishing below 500. Like this, I think they could find their way to 7 wins or 8 wins, but I don't see them as an above 500 team with that type of issue on their team. That being so inferior in that aspect is going to be a problem. So knocking down a quick summary here: 6-11, last in the division, the AFC North, one of the stronger divisions in the league. 13th in the conference, 23rd in the league, and overall, with the 18th coaching staff that I would argue could be possibly a top 15, top 12 coaching staff. The 14th total offense, just outside the top 10 in pass offense. 18th rush offense, one of the best, third best pass defense in the league, but one of the worst, third worst rush defense in the league, good enough for 17th total defense. And ultimately, the rush defense is the make or break for this team. And there it is, my number 23 team in my 2023 NFL Power Ranking Series. It's like the champagne birthday video. How about that? 23 for 23. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. You've made it this far, and I really appreciate it. And like the video, those 2 things will help with the algorithms, boost these videos up. And the playlist for this series is on one side of my head, and the next best video for you to watch, either the number 22 video, depending on when you're watching this, or it's the number 24 video, because you're here super early, and I appreciate you either way. And I will see you guys hopefully for the next video in this series. See you next time.